Welcome back to another episode of Fix and Rex, a fan fiction podcast. I'm your host, WMN. Today, we will be chatting with It Was Glorious, the author of our last episode's featured fic, Safe Haven. And in the second half of this episode, we will be joined by one of her longtime collaborators and talented fic author in her own right, British Teacup. Welcome to the podcast, It Was Glorious.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Thank you for agreeing to do this. So, you have 30 fics under the Bridgerton tag, and I gotta say, what led me to want to feature Safe Haven was the fact that even though it is your first fic, and here we are, 30 fics later, the fact that I can read your first fic now and see how it is so quintessentially It Was Glorious, it just made me want to take the time to talk to you about not just the story, but the birth of you as an author.
Thank you.
What was it about the show and this fandom that made you want to start writing fan fiction?
So basically I watched the show like anyone else, I think over the Christmas break or something. Really loved the show, was really into Simon and Daphne, and then I kind of started reading the books because at first I wanted more of Simon and Daphne, and then I very quickly learned that I wasn't actually that interested in them anymore. And I was really, really, really interested in like Penelope and Colin. And then I was really, really, really excited to read their book, and then like basically that's how the whole process. Whenever I do want to read something, I read like a book a day. So like 4 days after I'd finished the show, I read their book, and that's how I kind of got into it. So I read the book, I joined like Twitter. I'm very big on Twitter.
So that was when you started your Bridgerton Twitter?
I don't even remember specifically. Like what I definitely did, I was looking for fanfics basically, and looking to see if there was something out there that I wanted to read. And there was lots of stuff out there already, but it was like right after the first season, so there wasn't too much. And that's basically just how it started.
Did you specifically go looking for Pollen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was with you. And it was a lot of Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. Like the early ones were the Romancing Mr. Bridgerton fanfictions. And honestly, I loved them. There just wasn't a lot.
Exactly. It just wasn't many. And I kind of got through them. And I'm honestly also very picky about reading fan fiction, which is kind of probably a horrible thing to say on a podcast.
No. Talk to me about that. I want to hear.
But I'm honestly very picky about it. Like what I read.
I want to hear what you. No, I love that. Even as isn't getting to know you as an author, is that like when you say that you're picky about the fan fiction you read, what are you drawn to in terms of fan fiction that you do read?
I just need the characterization to be done right, and like. Going back to some of the stuff I've written, I actually kind of cringe because I don't think that characterization is where I am right now anymore, which is a weird thing to say. But I think like the show, like the way the show develops, and then you get into, I get very much into the show, especially season 3 now. So I feel like the characterization of how I used to see them and how I see them now has kind of changed a little bit, which is fine.
Yeah.
But I'm very big on like the characterization needs to be done right for me, and definitely a personal thing. Like whatever I prefer is definitely not what anyone else would prefer, and that's fine. But like
that's what's exciting, isn't it though? Because you can dive into our tag and there's really something for everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you don't like it, scroll on by. No harm, no foul.
You can find different versions and like a focus on different aspects of their personalities, and that's what I love about fandom as well. Like we make them what we want them to be, and you can just
absolutely
take the stuff that you like about them and make that your own, basically.
That's really cool. I'm glad that you shared with me what draws you to the fan fictions that you read, because honestly, I see that in your fan fictions. I wrote that down. You say that you cringe at it, but even in Safe Haven, you give us, it's a one shot, right?
Yeah.
You gave us that little Anthony and Kate moment, and then you even gave us that little teeny tiny Simon moment.
Oh yeah.
Even though it's just 1 or 2 lines from Kate, Anthony, and Simon, you know these characters, and that these characters can come into your world with one line and it is absolutely authentic to who they are.
That's very nice. Thank you. But that's actually one of the things I admire most about other people is the way that they, like, I have a very hard time kind of adding every character or a lot of characters. I really like just focusing basically on one couple, and I admire anyone who can like do the whole ensemble bits and add everyone and have these huge family scenes and make the work. That is like, to me, one of the hardest things.
Yes. I do love that, like, you, because Safe Haven totally shows this too, is that, like, you let us stay inside their happily ever after. You let us explore their relationship, and it's not fluff and it's not angst. It's something in between that's really real and beautiful, and sometimes that requires other characters, but a lot of the time it's just them, and it's fascinating and it's wonderful, and I think it is something that's very special to you.
Yeah, that's very nice. Thank you. I think what I kind of really like about them is the way that they, like, Julia wrote them in a way that kind of, and like everyone's talked about this a lot with season 3 especially, but they have they're very internalized characters, kind of like a lot of the conflict happens internally, and they kind of figure out how to communicate. And I think that's what I like writing most, is the kind of them figuring out like the miscommunication part of it, but then also kind of figuring out how to communicate, and that through communication it kind of, whatever's going on works out for them, whether it's like real angst or just like a fluffy kind of one shot where there's like minor conflict or something happening, or minor miscommunication going on. But I like the learning to communicate aspect of their relationship, and I think that's why I love Penn and Colin so much.
Yeah,
like they've had that in Romancing Mr. Bridgerton already, and I think it's very nice to dive into that in fan fiction as well.
Yeah, I hear that. So what made you feel like that you wanted to start writing?
I think I just wanted to see I don't remember a specific, like I have a very bad memory. Everyone's going to tell you that. But I think what kind of happened was that I wanted to read more kind of originally more Regency, like posts Romancing Mr. Bridgerton stuff. Mm-hmm. And that was basically the start of it. I just wanted to read more of them. And then it kind of, that's how Safe Haven kind of developed, from me just wanting to see them at a ball or something, and how would they act as a married couple at a ball.
I think it's a really special, it was glorious choice of you to decide your first fic was going to be this moment in a relationship, and it feels very real. Like, it feels very real, especially since we do know now that Colin had a life before Penelope, and that that might be something that comes up in the future.
Yeah.
And it's what you do so well too, right? It's not this huge explosive moment. It's a really quiet, very real moment that feels so earnest, and that's what you decided to explore for your first fan fiction. And I just thought that was so you to decide to do that.
Yeah, I'm interested more in the like what happens after the happily ever after. Like, I'm really interested in that. But I think any like real angst that I've ever written was like a completely kind of modern universe, or just changing the universe entirely. Like, I have a very hard time kind of working within the Romancing Mr. Bridgerton universe, changing stuff there. Yeah, I don't know why. I think I just genuinely like the book as it is, and I don't want to change anything about it. I don't know. I've never thought about it, but I think that might be it.
That's really interesting, because I'm now just processing that too.
Yeah. And like the ones that have angst are like usually ones that have like that's kind of changed stuff. Like the one thing I've written that has a lot of angst is like the Breakable Heaven part. That's like in Regency, and there is a lot of angst, but that's changed a lot of different stuff. Yeah. Like, there's no Lady Whistledown, which is probably the biggest change, because obviously.
And I was going to say that. No Lady Whistledown, no Marina. And that is something that's very you as well, is that like you'll tell a story and just be like, this doesn't exist. And we're going to explore them. And just like you said, characterization is what draws you to story. And so that's what you do is you say, well, what if the Colin that we know and love is a teacher? Or what if he's a movie star? And it's really cool.
Yeah.
Now that you say that it's because like that you loved Romancing Mr. Bridgerton so much. It was the characters that they left you with that made you want to keep going.
Yeah, definitely.
And now that I'm looking at your stories, yeah, that's really exciting to look at your list of fics and see that.
Definitely, yeah. I feel like that is probably it. I've never really thought about it, but I feel like that would probably best describe my approach to the whole thing. Like, I love the characters as they are. I kind of dive into different aspects of them at some points, I think. Depending on, I don't know what influences me at that point, whether it be the show or something else I've read or something I've talked about with people on Twitter.
Yeah.
And then kind of diving into different aspects of their characters and like putting them into completely different scenarios. But yeah, it's mostly about the characterization of them. Yeah.
So Safe Haven was your first fic. Did you end up establishing a process while you were writing it? Or has it evolved to something totally different now that you've been writing fics for literally years? You've been writing Bridgerton fics for years.
Yeah. I remember just like sitting down for like, because that was the very first thing I'd ever written. I've never done any creative writing basically except for maybe in school. And even like in school, like here there's not a lot of creativity in creative writing. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
Like we have creative writing in like lower secondary maybe, but then once you go on, there's no creative writing at all anymore. And then at university I did study English, but there was no creative writing at all. It was very much a linguistics kind of course and English teaching and stuff. So this was the first thing I'd ever written. And I just remember basically sitting down and I think writing it just in one go. I think I wrote the whole thing in one go and just like I sat down for the first few things I'd written. Like, I don't remember the exact order, but for this one and then I think Welcome to the Family was pretty soon after as well.
Yeah.
And those two I just basically sat down and I wrote a chapter a day and I think I uploaded a chapter a day. It was just kind of an outlet for me.
You wrote a lot. You wrote Safe Haven, Welcome to the Family, Milk Stains, That's What Good Parents Do, The Revenge of Eloise Crane, The Occasionally Not So Good Quiet Moments, which was several drabbles, all in 1 month. That's a lot.
I've never thought about that. Yeah, it was a lot.
So it was glorious back in May 2021 was like, it was on.
Yeah.
You had
something
to
say. Like a chapter a day. Let's go.
Let's go.
I remember just like, it was, I have to look at it. Yeah, it was shortly before like the summer break as well. That's why I had so much time, I think. But I remember sitting down at like every night, basically 6 p.m. to like 10 p.m. just writing. And there wasn't any structure to it at all. I just wrote whatever I felt like writing at that point. And then now I do kind of have another approach, because the more I got into like not writing one shots but actually like adding plot, I figured out that it's hard to just write, because you tend to kind of write yourself into a bit of a mess if you don't plan out stuff beforehand a little bit.
Yeah, and then you have to like no, I've been there. So now do you do outlines? A bit. I don't do too. I mean, to be honest, for the one I'm writing right now, the Grieving for the Living, I have a pretty clear plan on where to go from chapter to chapter, and that does change a bit. But usually, I just have a general outline and then go with whatever I feel like for each chapter, and that works for me. So I think the one was your first longer fic?
Yeah, like the Welcome to the Family, that was the first one that I had, like, where I noticed that I had, whenever I have plot, I have to kind of plan a bit beforehand. And then the one was the one where I figured out that I kind of,
got it.
If I write myself into kind of what is it called in English? Can't think of the word, like where I wrote myself into a corner, basically.
Yeah.
So that's the one is definitely the one where I had to figure out how to plot a bit beforehand.
Oh, I wrote one of my notes for the one was, okay, let's see. Okay, I just have to do a shout out for this line. You wrote, she loved loving him, even if it was not reciprocated. And I was just like, that line is so good.
Yeah. I don't know when the last time was that I ever read it, but that is a very cool line actually, because I feel like that is my life. I love loving stuff. And I feel it's such a nice way to approach like fandom in general.
I agree. That's why it resonated so much. So yeah, the one was one of the first 18 chapters. Yeah. And it was like pretty soon. It was the second month of you writing. You were like, sure, why not? Let's write an 18 chapter fic.
Yeah, but I think there's a scene where they're like at a party, and then afterwards she's storming off because is he talking to another girl or something? And that was the scene that started it originally in my head.
It's so dramatic.
Exactly, very dramatic. And that was the whole thing. That was the scene that I had in mind, and then I was like,
that's such a good scene, such a good BTS to know that was the jumping off point of that story. So that's where you had that, and then you built the whole story around that.
Yeah, around that basically, because what kind of wanted to explore was like this very insecure side of him. And then what I basically thought is that if I just like drop this part, no one's gonna won't make any sense to anyone. So I'll actually have to have like some kind of plot and characterization and stuff before that, and around that, and then kind of that's how it developed.
I loved it. Okay, so if I'm a casual reader and I go to a fic and it's 18 chapters long, I'm gonna just make a quick assumption, and it could be wrong or right, but my initial assumption is going to be it's a slow burn.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't really do slow burns. It was glorious. Like,
no, I hate them.
You always blow my mind. And so I feel like all of your tags should say this is not a slow burn. I just really like to explore relationships in a natural way. And they will get together when it's organically natural for them to get together. And guess what? We're not going to stop telling the story there. We're going to keep telling the story because you don't stop being interesting once you get together.
Exactly.
And so to me, that was my first moment of like, wow, It Was Glorious is really special, because I for sure thought this was going to be a slow burn.
I don't really like slow burns usually, except for whenever I do a slow burn, it has to be like childhood friends to lovers kind of thing, because I feel like the stakes are higher there, and then the slow burn makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But with just normal friends to lovers, if that makes sense, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think at least I don't like them too much.
I don't want to feel like I'm being tortured. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. And what I like is just, I do like writing them together.
And I know that, and I love that. And I feel like the one was like really the first time where we got to see you dig into that. But going back to something you said earlier, is that you wrote insecure Colin or vulnerable Colin. I can't remember how you exactly put it, but I noticed you often do choose to explore a more unsure or insecure Colin, and I think that's really interesting. And you often have Colin being just as besotted, just as longing, just as in pain as Penelope.
Yeah.
It's nice that Colin always generally for the most part, Colin joins her in her besottedness fairly early, if not from the beginning.
Yeah.
And they're both struggling instead of just one of them.
It's actually probably my favorite like parts of writing that's how I actually like to write Colin, is like having him kind of have that realization fairly early on, if not like right from the start. Sometimes it's right from the start, and then kind of figuring that out. And I think, and that's really interesting to me, is that like even with the show, is that at the surface, it's always like Penelope and Penelope's kind of development into like the woman that she becomes. But I think under the surface, it's very, very much about Colin and his insecurities and how he's kind of putting on this persona in every kind of way. He does that in Romancing Mr. Bridgerton as well. And I feel like
absolutely
him kind of figuring that out and how to kind of not get rid of this persona, but kind of make that persona match the person that he is. That's the interesting part for me. I don't know. I feel like very often I on the surface, I really focus on Penelope, but under the surface, there's a lot of Colin in there and how he kind of develops throughout the story.
Yeah. So it's interesting to hear you say that that was something you're drawn to, because that's definitely something that I notice in your writing. Do you have a favorite Colin that you've written?
Favorite Colin? Whew.
From your fics? Were you just like, yes, this is my favorite Colin?
Probably, oh, that one's hard. Either August Colin, although a lot of people honestly hated him at some points.
Mm.
So either August or Invisible String, I'm guessing.
Yes. Invisible String and August Colin are such great Collins. They both go on these huge growth journeys in both of those fics.
Yeah.
I hate that people gave you a hard time about August Colin. Ugh, August. I could talk about August forever. Because I think it was, oh wait, where is it? I wrote it down. Oh yes, in His Biggest Fear you said that you were not, in one of your notes you said that you were not really used to writing angst.
Oh yeah.
And I remember just being really surprised. I could literally just sit here and make myself cry just thinking about August.
To be honest, I think August is probably, it's definitely my favorite solo fic that I've ever written. And I think it's because of like the that it just happens over these years where you can actually see them developing and growing and kind of, yeah, turning, like the way they never quite lose contact. That's something that I really like. You can also see that obviously in Invisible String. I like the whole, like over the years, how do they grow and turn into the people that they are. And what I also like about August though is that it's just from her perspective, and I think it's the first time that I don't think I ever wrote just from Penelope's perspective before, and it kind of made it harder in terms of plots sometimes, because I had to figure out like how am I gonna kind of, how does she like get to know all of these little things that might become important for the plot.
And isn't it interesting that it's full Penelope POV and yet Colin feels so present even though his POV isn't there?
Yeah, it kind of gave you, I mean, obviously that's the reason why a lot of people, I feel like there was a time, especially like after he gets married, right? There's a lot of people in the comments that keep talking about how much they hate him, and back then I felt really like defending him because obviously in my mind I had all of his reasoning, right? And I understood why he was acting the way he was acting, but obviously people didn't that were reading it. But it was the first time that it was really interesting to me to see that if you just write from one person's point of view, it actually creates kind of more angst without you actually having to create angst in the plot, if that makes sense.
It does. Having only one POV leaves so much room for miscommunication and misinterpretation.
Yeah.
And Penelope is absolutely an unreliable narrator because she doesn't know that Colin's hurting just as much as she is.
He's just very lost in it.
Yes. The way you played it so perfectly all through the years, like he was on his phone fighting with the girlfriend, and just who he chooses to be with, it all informs his character. So to me, you reminding me, even though I already knew it, that it's all in Penelope's POV, and yet I feel Colin so concretely as a character in that fic is really, really special.
Yeah.
But I would have to say the thing that I loved the most about August is that you have captured that feeling of a season in the ton. How I felt watching Colin ride off on his horse in season 1, how I felt at the end of season 2 knowing he was leaving again. August gave me that same feeling. He's always looking for her. They're always looking for each other. And their life, their relationship is built on these short periods of time that they get to spend together.
That is so cool. I've never even thought of that, but yes.
And it's such a special, special fic that I could probably tell you chapter by chapter what happens.
That's so nice, because that's like, it's probably the fic that's like, that I'm most proud of, I guess, in a way.
What was your process like as you were doing that one? Because it's a song fic.
I love the song, and I just wanted to write something that kind of fits the song very much, and I just started writing out basically the lyrics and figuring out plot to go along with that.
Yeah.
And what I really, really wanted to focus on was I just wanted this Penelope to be extremely insecure at the beginning, and like to see how much she kind of evolves and grows, and then for him to do the opposite in a way throughout the fic. So he starts out at this very as this very confident teenager basically, and he's got this girlfriend later on, like a year after, and he's extremely confident, and he kind of becomes, or he doesn't become, but he's kind of, she's peeling back the layers, and you see more and more of his insecurities as you go along, until like at the very end, when we kind of realize that all he basically wants is to have her life and kind of be with her, and to have that kind of security and that kind of responsibility that she has. And that's when they kind of match, is when they kind of come to the realization, when she realizes that she doesn't want out, and that she doesn't necessarily want to be anywhere else, and that she actually loves this life that she has, and she's not really stuck, but she chooses to be there. And he realizes that he kind of, okay, he wants this, and he's willing to take a chance on this. I kind of wanted them to go in opposite directions, and then at the end meet, basically.
Yeah.
I feel like for a lot of it, Colin is searching for his purpose, but she's also kind of searching for hers and figuring out what does she want. And is it only her life and her insecurities holding her back? Or is it actually fine to want what you have? And that's what she has to figure out, yeah.
That's also connected to growth and timing, as well as that they met them when they were kids, and they didn't necessarily have that capability of communicating properly. And I think there's one point in the fic where she says that if she could go back, she would have said it. She should have just said it, but she couldn't, because that's not where she was in her life.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel I really like the growth aspect, like in most fics actually, but in this one especially, where they have to grow into themselves before they can actually be together, because they wouldn't have worked any other way.
I agree. So queer Bridgerton stories used to only exist in fan fiction, and one thing that I really appreciated about a lot of your work is that you both casually and also not so casually slip queer Bridgerton storylines into your work.
Because I think they're kind of missing in the books, and I get that they're like a product of their time. And it's like, I feel like the possibility is clearly there. Like there's a lot of instances where if you want to read them in a queer way, you can. And I really like exploring that a bit more. Like there's people that have done this way better and way more extensively than I have. But I kind of like adding a bit of representation, because I think that's important. And
it's not like huge portion of it, but what I love is that, like, okay, so you decided to have Gareth and Colin be together. I thought that was hilarious, because then you get to add Hyacinth. And I just think it's really cool that even though you do focus on Pen and Colin, you still add queer storylines and characters. And a lot of the times you make Colin and Pen queer as well, like Penelope and Cressida were together in Long Story Short.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that is also like kind of like not overly dissecting it, like especially in Long Story Short, where it's like it's kind of a bit of a throwaway line, not even really, but like it's barely mentioned that she was in this relationship with Cressida, and she didn't want to, like Cressida didn't want kids, Penelope wants them. And
I mean, I think if you're going to choose someone to not want kids, it would be Cressida.
Yeah, it would be her, definitely. And I remember even actually planning to make it more of a plot thing in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And then it kind of never made any sense. Like at any part in the story, it didn't really make sense to add her. So I just never did. But I feel like just adding these smallish kind of mentions already does a lot in terms of representation. Sometimes.
You actually wrote one of my all-time favorite spicy queer Bridgerton stories, Cake by the Ocean.
Oh, yeah.
With books and rings.
Yeah, I wrote that that one was with Meta, yeah.
For anyone who hasn't read it, Cake by the Ocean is a fic where Pen spontaneously joins Colin and Michael on vacation, and they have lots of fun together.
That was a fever dream. Like, the way we wrote that was a real fever dream.
I mean, the best fever dream you ever had.
Definitely. But it was like, I remember us coming up with this on Twitter. Like, we were in a Twitter group chat, and we were just talking about basically the three of them kind of just hitting it off. And then I just specifically remember like writing parts of it on the train. When I read through it now, it's like, okay, we're just writing smut on public transportation. But yeah, like we talked about it, and then it was just basically written in one go, and we would just like both a completely different process.
Yeah, talk to me about Books and Rings.
Yeah, just basically just everyone writes whatever they feel like, and then we kind of try to come and make it fit into one plot afterwards. It was just, sometimes we were writing,
oh my gosh,
they were both writing on one sentence. It was very weird, but it kind of worked.
It worked. Let me tell you, it worked. I love Pen Michael Colin. I love it so much. I feel like they make so much sense. Michael and Colin make so much sense. And I love it when Michael and Colin have a relationship too. Like, there's Pen Michael Colin fics where Michael and Colin don't interact with each other. But I just love it when they do. So, yeah. So, obviously, I love yours.
Yeah, and I feel like that is one of the things where you could actually read them as a queer, like them having kind of a connection as well in the original books.
A situationship of some kind?
Yeah, definitely.
But except in the original books, do you think so? Because it seems like Colin just hates him.
Yeah, but I feel like there's something there. But maybe I'm just like reading very, very, very much between the lines. But I feel like there's something there.
There is. I think there is.
Yeah.
They're so great together. And other authors think so too. One of my good friends, Celestial Mess One, wrote a great Michael Colin pen fic called 3 Doors Down, So You Can't Ignore It. And All That We Have Shared wrote a Colin Michael Philip fic.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I'm just such a sucker for Michael and Colin together. Maybe just because I love Michael so much. And you know what? I'm really freaking excited about seeing some Michaela Pen Colin fics.
I was honestly thinking about that today. Like, I was thinking about...
Were you? Oh my god.
Yeah, like how she would fit into this Cake by the Ocean part, actually. And how it would look to rewrite it with her.
Can you and Books and Rings get together and write another part to your series? Because this isn't a series called Cocktails all by itself.
Yeah.
There was supposed to be more. Was there supposed to be more?
I know, like it started out as, and then there wasn't. It's just one.
But see, the universe was telling you that it needed more.
Definitely. Yeah, maybe we should. I'll have to talk to her about it.
Oh my gosh, you don't even know. Okay, so yeah, I'm really excited about that. And so it was, yeah. You have a recent fic with Colin and John, and this one's actually called Fever Dream High.
Oh, it is, yeah. I was thinking, yeah. I don't remember how that one happened, to be honest.
It's one of your more recent fics, and I think that's really cool. You wrote that before we knew that we have canon. Thank you very much, queer Bridgertons.
Yeah, true.
And I appreciate that you and other authors were writing queer Bridgerton stories before they became canon. So, we spoke a little bit ago about what your collaborative process was like when you worked on Cake by the Ocean with Books and Rings, and I think now might be a good time to mention that when I was planning this episode, I knew that I could not have you on the podcast without talking about Invisible String, a fic you wrote in collaboration with British Teacup. So I cannot tell you how excited I was when I reached out to British Teacup to see if she would join us for the second half of the episode, and she said yes. Welcome to the podcast, British Teacup.
Hi, it's so lovely to be here.
Thank you for joining us.
You're so welcome.
Now that we've added another person, I thought maybe we could use your actual names, as I'm sure that's how you're used to communicating with each other. So... may I call you Ria?
Absolutely.
And It Was Glorious. Can we call you Tema?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. I have inhabited Pollen fanfiction fandom spaces for years now. And as a lover of angst and pain, I have been present and accounted for more often than not when folks are talking about or recommending angst. And I gotta say that at this point, I can't even count how many times I've seen Invisible String recommended by me and so many other people.
That's so generous of you.
No, so generous of you to say yes and be here with us. And getting this opportunity to talk to you both about your relationship and your collaborative process is really, really special. I know not just to me, but hopefully to everyone else who has loved your work.
Thank you.
So, what is the It Was Glorious British Teacup Meet Cute story?
So actually, I'm gonna hand this over to Ria because she's prepared.
Ria is the prepared one?
Yeah, she's always the prepared one. So I'm gonna hand this over to her actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, already. Amazing BTS.
So it really was kind of a meet cute. So Tama was writing a fic in June, July 2021. That was called The One. And I was absolutely hooked. And it helped that she, was churning these chapters out literally daily. You can actually see our first interaction ever. I went back and I checked the chapter number. It was chapter 12. I remember I was working on a deadline for
OMG.
work.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I really need you to screenshot that so that I can put it up on the podcast social media pages. Thank you. All right, so keep going.
So I was working on a hard deadline for work and I literally dropped everything. It was a really hot day. I dropped everything and read the chapter, obviously. And I'd been reading quietly since the first chapter went up, but I hadn't really, I was still one of those silent readers, and we love silent readers. But at that point I left a comment and I was stunned when she replied to me. And then I remember I didn't say anything on chapter 13 because it was, a rated E chapter, and I'm sure we'll get onto this, but I'm not good when it comes to smut. So I just sort of didn't say anything. And then I commented again on 14 and Tama basically flirted with me. So I was hooked.
Yes.
Oh, wait, what? I did?
You did!
On chapter 14? I'm actually pulling this up right now because can't believe that. Was it chapter 14?
Chapter 14 is when you flirted, yeah.
And that is funny because that chapter is called Cardigan.
I know.
Faded.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so can I say how relatable that story is? And I will say, just from the reader versus author perspective, I'll never forget that moment where the author recognizes you and you're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, this person who you've just hung on their every word, who's brought you so much joy and pain, all the feelings, and they're real and they're talking to you. Yeah, and then, when the first flirt comes,
it's like crack, honestly.
Yeah, honestly, I would talk to my husband, I'd be like, oh my god, Criticars talked to me today, and he would just think it was the most pure, beautiful thing ever. So to hear you say that, it fills my heart. I love it. Did you find it, Tama?
Yeah, I did actually flirt. That is funny. I did not remember that. To be honest, I'm gonna be very honest here. I thought we'd met on Twitter.
That's so Colin of you. That's so book Colin of you to not remember your meet cute.
Yeah, I mean, I have a horrible memory in general, and I genuinely thought we met on Twitter.
I actually made the Twitter account to follow you.
Oh, did you?
Without sounding super stalkery, but I made that. So basically I could follow fic writers like you, Sophia the Almost Writer, the Sushi Monster, people like that. Beautiful, beautiful tropical fish. All these amazing Colin fic writers from that gap between season 1 and season 2. That's when I followed people and made these amazing friendships.
I have such a special place in my heart for post season 1 fic writers?
I feel like, to be honest, that's when you could kind of be the most creative, because like season 1 set them up a little bit, but there wasn't too much that kind of went in a certain direction, so you could basically still do anything. So there was kind of some stuff already where you could go with show canon or book canon, but the majority of it was just you could do whatever you want.
And, you know, there's lots of fic writers even now who are still doing that, who are still exploring things that have like a glimmer of canon here and there, and then they tell their own stories. You guys do that as well.
Yeah, I love that actually, but I feel like it becomes a bit harder the more canon stuff there is, or at least I think about it more. Like I'm more in my head about it. Maybe like how would people kind of view this, knowing what we know now about them, basically.
Yeah. See, I think you might feel like that, but also you're so happy to throw everything out of the window at the same time. Like, as long as the vibes are there, you're there. So it's interesting to hear you say that, because I really don't see that when I'm looking at your writing.
Yeah, okay.
So, how did the idea for Invisible String come about, and what made you decide to collaborate on it?
So Rhea, I'm going to hand this over to you again, because I'm horrible, and you actually did research on this, so...
Oh, absolutely.
Well, do you remember anything of it before Rhea steps in with her awesome memory?
I remember, I remember I think like the initial idea for us to work together was mine, but I'm not sure if that's true.
Rhea, was it true?
Do you want me to step in? So, I think the idea was yours. But it's almost like that wasn't our first sort of foray into being collaborators. So I remember Tama went away on holiday, camping, I think, in Europe.
Oh, right.
And and when she got signal one day, she had this fully formed fic in her brain, and I don't know how she does it. Like, this is not infrequent. A whole fic is just in her head. And that fic became Cardigan. I don't know if I like cheekily asked to beta it or just read it for other people.
I think I asked you because you kept making fun of like the direct speech thing, and then I was like, okay, then you're gonna have to actually be the one to change that. And I think that's
I did
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so you definitely have you've definitely betaed a lot. Like, the relationship was absolutely strong.
Oh, yeah.
So then what made the experience of Invisible String different? How is it different than previous collaborations?
Yeah, so I wasn't. Tama was getting to the end of writing Cardigan, and she'd started another fic, which was Breakable Heaven. And that was Regency. But then we'd also sort of come up with another fic that was modern. It must have been me who sort of sold myself as, I can absolutely write, I promise. Because I feel like Tama would have just been happy to crack on with with Breakable Heaven. We had some ideas from the off, just from little conversations that we'd have whilst Cardigan was being written. Not necessarily useful things, but we decided that each chapter was going to be sort of a year of their lives, so we could span all this time without it being too gappy or too long.
That's such an important aspect about what makes the fic so successful, so I was really just super interested to hear more.
I know we wanted to cover them in their earlier years. We wanted to sort of show that this was a real childhood friends to lovers to strangers to lovers to, you know, the relationship goes through a lot. I know we needed to show that, and I don't necessarily know that it was one of us. It was just sort of a, how can we do this? Sort of, it was a lot of the fic was very sort of dual approach. It was, we're both working on something, and we trusted each other, I think, to come up with these ideas. I mean, even thinking back to writing some of the chapters, we sort of had a skeleton, really, of this is the year, these are their ages, what do kids these age do?
Yeah, where are they in their lives at that age?
Yeah, and I think the tough part kind of sometimes was to have these ages, and like once we decided we'd do every age, to kind of fill it in a way that kind of not necessarily
Made sense.
yeah, and I mean kind of showed a new aspect of their relationship, or
yeah.
because there's not really a lot of plot in the beginning. I mean, it's just basically diving
Setting
into
the
the relationship
scene.
and the different different aspects of it, and that's I think what kind of was a bit hard about the earlier chapters,
Yeah.
kind of showing different aspects of all of that.
Because really a lot happens in our lives. So much changes.
Yeah.
From 10 to 13. And they also have an age difference. So it's
Yeah.
a lot of dynamics happening there. It was really interesting to see you navigate that.
Yeah, and it was about kind of showing the characters, like how the characters themselves develop, but also how they kind of continue to be friends through a lot of different stuff that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially as you mentioned with the age difference, which I think like is a very hard thing to do sometimes. Like I reread some of it today. I didn't get to finish, but like what was it? Like 12 and 15. There's a
Yeah.
huge difference in like
Yeah.
what your life looks when you're 12 or when you're 15. So I think that was probably the toughest part, because I think, I'm not sure if this is true once more, but I think we kind of decided pretty early on what the plot was going to be,
Yeah.
like in the later
The
chapters.
sort of like end plot was fairly
yeah.
done.
But we had to kind of make sure that the earlier stuff kind of sets it up in a way that makes sense later on for why they react to certain things the way that they react.
Yeah, well, you started us at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Started us at
That
the
was
wedding.
actually,
So
I think that was like a last minute idea, to be honest.
I have the story for that if you want it.
Yeah,
yes.
go ahead.
So Tama thrives on audience response. Like comments are her food almost when it comes to writing. And I'm very much not someone who likes to, well, I mean, I don't. I knew if we started posting, I just wouldn't actually finish what I was writing. So we compromised quite heavily. We agreed that we were going to start posting on, I think it's the 3rd of January, because it's Tama's sister's birthday. Have I got the date right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, amazing. So we knew we were going to start on a Monday because that made it really clean and fresh. And we had this fic almost finished. I remember I was like, I want this fic to be 80% finished, otherwise I'm just not going to have the momentum.
you also start feeling that pressure. The second you post your first chapter,
Yeah.
and really honestly, the second you get your first reader commenting, you feel that pressure.
Yeah. And also that pressure is something that I don't necessarily like. Whereas that definitely feeds Tama and she really uses that positively. I just sort of see the numbers going up and stress. So I wanted it to be as close to finished as possible. If it was as close to finished as possible, then we wouldn't have people, especially in some of the later chapters, who would be like, oh, why are they doing this? I didn't want that to feed into what we were doing. So in a compromise.
I'm so with you on that. I mean, but like, I am supportive of authors who do want that audience interaction.
Yeah.
What's happened to me a couple of times is that people have actually, like, with their comments, opened up a new perspective or kind of made me think how whatever I planned, or like the way I planned it, like nothing's ever fundamentally changed about the things I planned, but like little stuff in between has changed because people have kind of commented and have kind of made me aware of the direction I was going and how that didn't make a lot of sense. So I think that's one of the reasons also why I like it, because sometimes they do have genuinely, and they don't know, like no one ever knows, but they say something and I'm like, oh right, that makes sense. Actually, I'm going to have to change that.
As long as they nicely say that.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of compromise, and I will put my hands up and say that I was stubborn enough to win a lot of those. But we sort of compromised by releasing that little prologue in advance of the proper release. And it made sense. It got people excited, and I didn't feel the pressure as much, because it was sort of that is the ending, and we're now working towards that, rather than here's an open page, here's the first chapter.
That's interesting that the reason that it happened was out of a compromise, but that like what results is like this really lovely moment of like, wow, we see them at the end, and then we see them as children, and we know the road is going to be long and tumultuous. And so it's just it sets it up, and it sets the tone in a really lovely way. So it's interesting to hear that, where that came from. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I'm actually glad we did it like that. I think it makes a lot of sense in retrospect.
Yeah.
But I think it was more of me being kind of pushy about starting to post, and then you being like, no, we can't. And I think that was kind of how it started. But I think it does make a lot of sense, yeah.
So how did you, going back just a little bit in terms of your process, how did you decide how to divide the writing tasks, or how did you decide what your relationship was going to be like? Because I know every collaborative relationship is different.
I think, like, basically what we did is we, as I've mentioned before, we already had a plot in mind. Like, that was the starting point of all of it. And then we just opened a Google Docs and kind of typed that out. And then it was like free for all. We basically just started adding stuff wherever we felt like adding it. And then started writing. And it was a very strange process in the way that we genuinely both wrote every chapter.
Yeah.
How so? Can you explain that?
So I'm more of the dialogue person, I would say. Mm-hmm. So I like writing dialogue. I love everything about writing dialogue. Like, that is definitely my strength. And then Ria's strength is definitely kind of fleshing it out. And that's kind of how we wrote most of it, I think. Would you agree? I think basically that's like, I wrote most of the dialogue, you wrote most of the stuff around the dialogue, basically.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting, because British Teacup, I would say, when I read your stories, you love a detail. Like, your stories are really full and rich with details. And even if it's a small detail, it's so fully explored. And so to hear that, like, that is what your relationship was is really interesting. So thank you for sharing that, Tama.
I mean, even now with the stuff that Tama's writing currently, she'll message me things, and she just knows that I'll either know the answer or I will have to look it up. For Grieving for the Living, in an earlier chapter, I think, she messaged me going, did they have pens in 18 whatever it is? And I was looking that up. That's just the sort of relationship we've got.
So from your perspective, how did you divide the writing tasks? That you just kind of dove in, and there was not like a specific conversation where you decided what the parameters of it was?
No, there was no real conversation. We, like I said earlier, we just sort of trusted each other to do it. And also, and this has continued in more recent things, if things don't read right, then one of us will change it, even if the other's written it. When I say we can't read sentences without going, I genuinely don't know who wrote this, it was probably both of us. Like, we have that level of just trust.
That is a level of trust. Honestly, I love that so much. I have a couple relationships where it's just baseline. They know that everything I'm doing is coming from a place of kindness, coming from a place of like just wanting what they write to be the absolute best. And those relationships are so special to me, because I can literally just say, like, just like you said, like, that doesn't work. I think this should get cut. They just know that, like, it's not judgment at all. So, but to me, that's next level when like you trust each other to change your actual words.
I mean, I hope that Tama doesn't hate me doing it, because she obviously writes a lot more than I do, so it's more one way. But
No,
yeah,
I was just thinking about it, but I think why it worked and how it worked was that we kind of usually had writing dates where we just decide, like on a day, we'd both basically sit down and write in the document, and then we'd usually write on different chapters. So you'd write on chapter, I don't know, 20 something, and I'd be on chapter 18.
Oh yeah, there was no order. There was absolutely chaos, honestly.
I love it. Like go where the inspiration is taking you.
I mean, to be honest, and this is a funny thing, I don't think I'd be able to do that if, like, whenever I write by myself, because we talked about this.
Yeah, we did.
I basically start from a specific scene usually, and like the whole, I just want to get there. And once I got there, I'm not really that motivated to write anymore. So usually I'll have to like have that scene towards the end.
That's so relatable. You're basically describing the process of a million abandoned fics.
Yeah, definitely, basically. And then I have to like force myself to finish it, which is why very often I'll write like the climax of a fic basically, and then there'll be like a 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, and sometimes monthly or month-long hiatus on the fic because I'll have to force myself to finish it, but I can also not finish it. Like it's horrible, like I can't not finish something. But basically that's how I work. And then with Ria it was easier because she was the one pushing me basically. I knew she'd hand me my ass if we didn't finish this. So that's how it was kind of easier to like write out of order for me, and it worked for the like the fic as well because of the way it's structured. That works very well.
It also meant that we could foreshadow with things because we weren't publishing it every time we finish a chapter, so we could go back.
Yep.
So, for example, Harriet actually makes an appearance way earlier in the book, fic. She's there in a much earlier chapter, and the name would have meant absolutely nothing to anyone reading it for the first time, but for rereaders, and I actually read it all again today, I was just sort of like, oh, there she is. So I think writing out of order, not posting as we went, I think a lot of that lent itself really nicely to the fic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like, to come back to the kind of collaboration aspect and trusting each other, I think the writing dates really help because what we'd usually do is like we'd write either a section of a chapter or the whole chapter basically, or finish a chapter or whatever, and then we'd go and read the stuff that the other person had written, and we'd be able to talk about it right away. And I think if you can talk about it right away, that, and like you're also still in the thought process of what you meant when you wrote that, then that makes it easier to kind of change stuff around, and it doesn't feel as, I wouldn't say hurtful, but maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it feels more collaborative than when you'd write on your own and then the other person would read it days after.
That's true, because you're both working towards the same goal at the same time. How long would your dates last?
Ooh, a couple of hours.
There was one where we wrote kind of a huge amount. I don't remember exactly how many words. It must have been a few thousands on one day.
At least, yeah. It was a really long time.
The inspiration was flowing.
Yeah, I think it was over the Christmas period. It must have been. Or, no, it would have been Christmas. And we were both off from work. So we did just have these days where we weren't, doing family stuff, where we could just write. So I'm sure it would have been one of those.
Yeah. I think it was like...
That's awesome.
At least 5,000 words, if not up to 10,000 that we wrote in a single day. That was a lot.
That's wild.
I also remember, actually, we had a falling out over that Christmas period, and I was really stubborn, and I was just thinking of ways, like, not in a malicious way, but like, how can I be better. And I remember sitting down and I wrote 12,000 words in 3 days. And if anyone knows me or has read my fics, I don't write that much. So things got done. I don't know if you remember that, Tama.
Not really.
You do remember that.
No, I honestly, I don't remember the falling out part.
Can I just say though, when you're saying that, I have all the feels because I have relationships, very close relationships that I made, and they're very real. When we hurt each other, it hurts as much as any IRL relationship that I have in my life. It's the exact same amount of communication when we come back together.
Oh yeah, I genuinely sometimes talk more to like online friends than real friends because
Yeah.
I feel like you make more time for it sometimes. I don't know, it's weird. So I agree, it's like very, very real friendships.
Yeah, it is. It really is. So it's interesting to get that little BTS that you had a moment, but you came back together, obviously.
Oh yeah, I mean, at this point, I feel like it sounds stupid. It almost feels like a relationship, like a romantic relationship. It's not. Would like to put it out there. She's gorgeous, but you know, and it's that sort of. Again, we had another falling out because this happens. It was my fault. We'll put my hands up to it. But I wrote another fic, and I can't remember the name of it now. But it was Colin and Penelope had a fight, and he went off to get her hot chocolate, and there was a power cut, and that was just such a cathartic way of getting it out there. And actually, I saw a lot of us in that. You know, we're a team. We're a really good team when we put our minds to it. And
You are.
I will say, Tama has never intentionally done anything to hurt me or jeopardize anything. It's always been what's going on in my head. But
Aww.
yeah, I think at this point we're really strong, and that comes across in our writing as well. And you know, we've got that
does.
trust that you have in any relationship, you'd like to think, and you've got all of these elements.
It's true. And you work on this, and I did a lot of collaborative work with criticers, and I would call them our fic babies. Because you're just in the trenches making this story come alive, and it really just does feel like this product of your union. So yeah, and sometimes it hurts. I personally, just me being nosy, want to know, British Teacup, is it you that added Nicholas and Georgie to the scenario? If so, blessings upon you.
I think it was a joint decision. We have a friend.
We both read it like previously.
So we have a friend, T, 3 Fundamental Truths, who I'm sure people will know writes amazing fic. Loves Nick and Georgie. Got us both to read this book, and we're just all over that. So when we came to write this fic, it wasn't even a decision. We were having Nick and Georgie.
Listen, to me, I'm like, hello. They live right there.
I know.
The way I need more people to write Rokesby Bridgerton crossover fan fiction.
Yeah.
So anyway, that is one of the things that very much endears this fic to me, as if I needed any more reasons for it to be endeared to me.
We sort of saw them as becoming the 3rd and 4th parents in this vacuum that Edmund left behind. Or at least that's how it appeared to me. So you will see quite a lot of Nick and Georgie mentioned just sort of offhandedly, or there's a scene where Nicholas has to take Colin to the hospital that Georgie works at. Things like that, where they're very much a part of this family, and we wanted to include them because it
especially in a modern AU.
Yeah,
and it made a lot of sense because like in a modern setting, like, God bless her heart, but Violet would never have been able to raise all of those kids completely by herself. Like, in Regency setting, like Anthony being, I don't know how old was he when Edmund died.
18.
18. That kind of, you were considered an adult and that was fine, but like in a modern setting, you're not an adult at 18. Like legally you are, but you're not. And so we kind of also needed someone to kind of be there to step in and help a little bit, I guess. So it made sense in that regard as well. And we didn't have to come up with an elaborate thing or scheme or whatever, because they were right there.
Georgie lived Conso, and she foretold the redheaded alliance. So it was just it was beautiful. And Ria, you even wrote another Nicholas Georgie fic. Is it part of the Invisible String series?
It is. So that, I think, was written for Tama's birthday. If it's the one that I think you're talking about, the kisses.
Yes. Baby Kiss It Better.
Yeah, so that was for Tama's birthday. And
you also have a Cathead fic.
I do, and that's Patch, and that was written for our friend Olivia, who has just been, she championed Patch from the very first time Patch was mentioned, so that was written for her birthday as well.
Aww. Okay, were there any challenges you faced while working on the story, and how did you overcome them? We talked a little bit earlier about just like interpersonal relationship, that's just regular everyday things that come up, but like in terms of writing the story, were there challenges that you faced?
I think the most challenging part of the story is how to not make it look ridiculous that they don't figure it out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like it's walking a fine line kind of, and that's probably the thing that we've talked about most and worried about most, that it just becomes too much, like it's too drawn out. And I think we fell onto the right side of it. I don't know.
Yeah,
but I think that was probably the thing that was the most challenging. Like why are they not together yet? Like why is there still miscommunication and stuff like that?
The most successful slow burn stories to me should have an author wondering that throughout the process. And I could see that because their story is so long, that it is a tightrope kind of that you walk, but that I could see the intentional nature in which you approached it, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, I think for me as well, it's always about I think in this, like for Invisible String as well, but for most of the stuff that I've written as well, is like always about the age as well. So what especially August is like a good example because it's kind of structured the same way.
August. We talked about it already. Don't make me start again.
Yeah, and kind of like talking about how at a certain age you're not good at communicating, and there's a lot of like personal insecurities that will influence the way you react to something, and kind of getting into the mindset of that is the hard part, I think, but also the thing that lends itself to the whole miscommunication trope.
Yeah,
I think their lack of self-esteem in certain aspects as well, definitely, they almost don't feel. They may love the other person, but they don't necessarily at that moment feel like they're worthy of the love of that person. So they almost don't want to communicate because there's no good outcome in their brain for this. So they're less likely to open themselves up, even though they are each other's best friends.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like what's very important to us from the start is, even when they don't talk for that 1 year, basically, there was never any question about how much they love each other as friends still.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably like the most important chapter for me to write, and I think also the most satisfying.
Yeah, when they just check in every couple of months.
Yeah, one to write, where they're actually not talking and not really communicating, but they're kind of, you still feel the love between them, and that they would never ever kind of risk that or lose that, maybe more than risk that.
Yeah. So what was the most rewarding part of collaborating on Invisible String?
I'm gonna say what was most rewarding for me was actually being able to write a fic with any sort of plot and length to it. It's those sort of skills, those sort of having an idea in your brain is not something that comes naturally. So having that sort of, I mean, Tama has never written a short fic in her life, it would appear. And having that sort of something to work towards, something to work alongside of, that was really rewarding because I can do it. I might just need to do it with someone, but I can do it, and I'm really proud of what we were both able to achieve with it.
I think for me, it was like one of the best things about the whole experience was having someone to talk to, like to basically just word vomit to about the ideas in my head. Like I do talk to you a lot, Ria, about the stuff that I'm writing when we're not like actively collaborating. But I also keep a lot of it in because I don't want to be annoying, basically. And the nice part of it was... I'm sorry,
can I just have this on the record? Can I have this on the record on this podcast? You can never annoy me. You crack on.
It's on the record.
Yeah, but it does feel like I don't want to like be too self-involved maybe in our conversations sometimes. Maybe let's put it like that. And then, but in this case, I was able to kind of basically just say whatever I was coming up with, and also have someone where I could like share ideas and you'd honestly tell me if it was shit or not good.
Yeah.
And that was nice. Like usually, I mean, you still do that, but sometimes I kind of have to get there myself as well. And it's nice not to have to.
Yeah. There is a lot of pressure, even though it's all for free again. It's all for our creative expression, but there's something special about doing it in collaboration. There's something special about sharing the pressure of it.
Yeah.
About not having to be the only one to make decisions. About even like the highs, even when you're like, oh, this is so good. Or when there's angst, when you write angst and you have someone to cry with, you know?
It was really fun, actually, when we hit those angsty chapters and we'd be getting the comments. You can imagine the sort of comments. And it was really good to sort of be able to sort of evil cackle in the corner with someone.
Yeah, and go back to your partner and be like, tee-hee-hee, we're breaking their hearts.
Yeah, exactly.
Do virtual high fives.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all that amazing invisible string and collaboration, BTS. I really appreciate you both. So, in a post-season 3 world, what plans do each of you have?
So there's basically 2 ideas I still kind of have, but I'm not really sure yet. Like one is actually with Ria. And there's one other one that I'm kind of not... Like there's one thing that we've started basically, but never continued.
Uh-huh.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah.
So this was pre-season 3?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's another like modern...
This has been going for like 18 months. That's just been on the back burner very much.
No, yeah.
But we are picking it up. We're going to pick it up.
Yeah, so that's kind of still on my mind a little bit. And then I do kind of... I'm probably going to do a few one-shots, like post-season 3 one-shots maybe. I'm not sure yet. But yeah, nothing like very specific right
There's
now.
There's nothing burning now that season 3 is over. There's nothing burning to come out.
No, not yet. But I think I'll get there. I'm still in the rewatch phase of my brain rot, kind of. And once that's kind of done with, and I've rewatched it enough that I can basically do the whole thing by heart, then usually what happens...
You still have fire for Pollen. You still have that desire to tell stories about Pollen.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm actually still, like, I'm kind of mourning the loss because it's going to be another 2 years, and it just seems way too long to me. But yeah, I do kind of still plan on doing something.
So we're both participating in the Care for Gaza fundraiser. So I'm very excited to get into writing again. There is something in the works. that, if I manage to persevere, could be multi-chapter, which I'm really excited about. And that would be a solo one. And now I'm saying it here, I have to do it.
I mean, I will. I'll knock on your Twitter door and be like, tick, tick, tick.
And that's a post-season 3 fic. It's actually based on a meme that Tama posted on her Twitter. You know, sometimes inspiration just comes.
Do I know about this or do I not?
What was the meme?
Oh, what is it? It's something about the title of Colin's book in the books.
Oh, Traveling with Myself?
Yes. And Tama, you better know about this because I'm sure I've told you. I asked you to talk me out of writing something, and you said no.
I remember. I just didn't know like you were talking about this one. Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So that's in the works, and as ever, it's something that I'm having to do a lot of research for, which I'm
So does that mean a
loving.
Regency fic?
It might be. Yes.
Ooh.
So that's going to be interesting to write, especially because I don't want to post things as I go because, like I said earlier,
I've learned that about you.
I fall out of it. So hopefully people will enjoy it if it eventually comes out in 2 years' time.
But honestly, that's a really cool thing to learn about British Teacup, is that like you're not going to dive into something without having a plan.
Yeah, and actually that's something really interesting. I stopped writing for about a year, and that was predominantly because I was getting loads of comments going, when's part 2 coming? And it was very much a one-shot, and it's really quite demotivating for those sort of comments for me, whereas Tama thrives on comments. I very much don't thrive on comments asking me to do more work when I've already done it all. So yeah, if I'm posting something, it's finished.
I appreciate you saying that. I definitely appreciate authors who say, hey, give me your comments, give me your ideas, and authors who are like, no.
Yeah.
I try not to ever enter anything without permission from an author. But if an author says, what do you guys think? What do you, I will absolutely give my opinion. But yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important that we are intentional in our comment section as readers. Amazing. So, Ria, it sounds like you're very inspired.
It's never intentional. I'm never necessarily seeking out inspiration, but then when things hit, they really hit. So that meme that I said about Tama posting, that was something that just stuck itself in my head, and I thought, hang on, I've got something
That's
here.
so cool.
And then I spent the next however many hours, it was a lot of hours, deep diving, researching, plotting things out on a map, you know, all sorts.
I love nerdery. Nerdery is just my bread and butter. Okay. Whenever possible, I like to ask our authors what their all-time favorite Pollen fanfiction is. And this time we get 2. And before we dive in, I just want to ask you, did you both talk to each other about what recommendations you were going to be giving me?
No, actually not.
No.
No? Okay, oh my gosh, I love this so much. Okay, so who's going to go first?
Have we picked the same fic?
No. Let's do It Was Glorious. Let's do Tama first. What is your pick for all-time favorite Pollen fanfiction?
Okay, so I picked Romanticizing Mr. Bridgerton by Beautiful Tropical Fish, because she's just extremely funny, and it is honestly astounding to me how someone can give us a modern plot of Romancing Mr. Bridgerton only using text messages. That is just too good.
It's incredible. And Ria, just so you know, like way back at the beginning of this interview, Tama and I were talking about what she looks for, and she's very selective in the fan fiction that she reads. And she said that like characterization is everything to her. And so when you bring me Romanticizing Mr. Bridgerton, it's like I'm not even surprised. I'm like, well, yes, of course that's your favorite Pollen fan fiction, because the characterization is just jaw-dropping.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and so like I still don't understand how she's able to do that using just texts and text language basically as well. It is, yeah.
The way you have to
Amazing.
know your characters in order to make text fics successful.
Yeah.
And the fact that she did every single character. She even added Felicity, like as if there weren't enough Bridgertons and in-laws. She was like, let's do Felicity as well.
Yeah.
So the fact that like she added maximum number of characters and nailed every single voice is just
Yeah.
one of the biggest feats in the tag, honestly.
It's incredible. She does it for every book as well. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, and I kind of what I also wanted to add is what I think is so great about her is that in every single one of her fics, she has this chaos and she writes that so well.
Yes.
And it is what I come for basically is the chaos and the humor of it. But then there's always at least one scene, if not more than one, that is also just extremely soft and well written and just kind of melts like my heart a little bit because she's so great at doing those as well. And yeah, I don't get it, like how she does both.
It's wild. Absolutely, hands down. Such a great pick. And now, Ria, what is your pick for your all-time favorite Pollen fanfiction?
So I think it's really funny here because
I do too. Say it.
So Tamara and I like to think of us as like a fic writing, team.
Yeah.
I know. My God, my heart. Just say it so everybody else knows why you and I are having feels right now.
So I chose a fic by Beautiful Tropical Fish's other half, which is Sophia the Almost Writer.
Really
and I
funny.
chose Welcome to the Digital Age, babe.
I mean, I just want you to know that when I saw that you'd both chosen text fics, it brought me so much joy, both because of how like serendipitous it was that even your recs are in harmony with each other, but also because text fics are so deserving of love. So the fact that like we get to just be here and say text fics are amazing, but also like how cute is that? So yes, Welcome to the Digital Age, babe, by Sophia the Almost Writer. Tell us why that's your fave.
I just love it so much. I think Sophia stalled a couple of chapters into it, and I basically annoyed her to continue writing it.
Oh, but blessings upon you for being the person to knock on her Twitter door, knock on her AO3 door.
Oh, I was annoying her into finishing it, so much so that she eventually gifted it to me on Archive of Our Own.
Oh, that's so special.
I'm a sucker for a good text fic, and it's one of the best, and it makes my heart so full when I see people post screenshots of bits on Twitter, because it just means so much. I love that fic so much, and Sophia's just such a lovely person as well.
There'll be times where I just will get up and be like, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous how good this premise is, how good this structure is. Immediately upon entering Welcome to a Digital Age, babe, it's like on one page, 3 years pass.
Yes.
Yeah.
The brilliance of that, and how like Invisible String is kind of the opposite of that. Invisible String is a timeline fic. It's a massive timeline fic where we're in that timeline, but it is full. It's bursting with experiences and memories and all of this stuff. And Welcome to a Digital Age is the ephemeral moments that we spend together over a lifetime in a way that's like similar. I mean, this is wild that I get to talk to both of you right now. In a similar way as August, but even more because of this is just like they talk 2 lines in 1 year. Versus August, it's also ephemeral, but they have a month.
Yeah.
It's just so wild to see the talent that we have in our tag, to see similar structures. Like, hello, right here, right now. Similar structures, August, Invisible String, Welcome to the Digital Age, be explored in massively different ways.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that's our time. I'm so thankful. Thank you. It was glorious to you for allowing us to record Safe Haven, for for sitting down with us and talking
Thank you
about
so
your
much.
process and everything. I really appreciate you.
No, I honestly wanna thank you, because I never thought I'd kind of be brave enough to do this. So this was also a new experience for me, but it was so much fun to talk to you, and you were so nice, so thank you so much.
Thank you. You guys were amazing. British Teacup, you came in. I know it's been a minute since you've written Invisible String, but thank you for being our memory keeper. And
You're so welcome.
really, I'm so thankful for both of you.
Thank you so much for letting us talk about this. I think it's been such a... It was such a labour of love, and it was just brilliant to do. And yeah, I'm just so grateful that we get to talk about it.
JK, you thought the podcast was over, but here we are. We're back.
We're back.
Can't get rid of us.
The three of us ended up chatting about Pauline's ex Care for Gaza. And Ria, I think you're the one who told us that the emails had already gone out.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I didn't get because I've been preparing for this interview.
You're being very professional.
So I logged off, ran upstairs. I got British Teacup. I mean, come on.
So weird how we were talking about it, joking about it, and it's actually happening.
It's actually happening. I was like, definitely the windshield wipers on my eyeballs. I was like, no way.
So I'm really honoured that I get to write for you.
I'm trying to chill. I'm trying to play it real cool and not insert myself in your process.
Oh no, insert away, honestly. Like, I thrive off a good prompt. I mean, you expect something very detail heavy, I think, following our conversation earlier.
I'm really excited what you two come up with.
I know, right? So yeah. Isn't it awesome? And over $4,200 was raised for Care for Gaza.
Over 4,000, yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah, and honestly, like, kudos to Colleen for pulling this off, like, amazingly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's pretty special that we got the results while we were together.
Yeah.
I look forward to speaking to you a lot more.
I know, like, it's supposed to just be like a prompt, but I'm like, no, this is a relationship now.
Good.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye for real this time.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Fix and Rex podcast. Links to It Was Glorious's and British Teacup's AO3 author profiles, as well as their Pollen fic recommendations, can all be found on the Fix and Rex social media pages. Join us next time for more fanfiction, conversations, and recommendations. Until then, I'm WMN. Happy reading.